Where do you find the most terrifying of monsters? Maybe the scariest of monsters could have been around us all along. Sometimes, it is the ones hidden in plain sight that could be the most dangerous, the ones paraded and admired, the ones you trust the most. Enter Kisuke Urahara. Who is the most important character in Bleach, other than the main character Ichigo? With this video, it would be hard to argue for anyone other than the conductor in the shadows, Kisuke Urahara. A true master never reveals their secrets, as there is still much we do not know of Kisuke. Could Kisuke be the puppet master, pulling the strings from the background to dictate the events of Bleach? Could Kisuke Urahara, the once mentor of Ichigo, be the secret villain of Bleach? Through the light novel series, we got to peer into his mind to better understand this mysterious man. What exactly does the future hold for the umbrella in the unforgiving rain, Kisuke? Let us explore these questions and far more. This video would cover the impact Kisuke had through the events of Bleach, a rundown of Urahara's involvement in the light novels of Camp Fear Your Own World, and finally, an analysis of the shady man of 1,000 plans. Let us uncover the ever so charismatic and mysterious Mr. Hat and Clogs.
At initial glance, Kisuke gives off the vibes of a drunk but harmless, homeless man with his beard, stubble, odd choice of clothing, and laid-back personality. But I'm sure that is exactly what he wants others to think of him. With the fan covering his face and the constant shadows given off by his signature hat, he exudes a mysterious aura. We were quick to find out that this shady man was perhaps the greatest example of a wolf in sheep's clothing. We are introduced to Kisuke as the mysterious but humble, plain old candy store owner, but he is in fact perhaps the most important character in the background. No one has helped the main character Ichigo more than Kisuke Urahara. From my last video on Aizen, you can say that he pretty much planned Bleach. That said, if it was Aizen who planned Bleach, then it was Kisuke Urahara who worked tirelessly on the field to ensure everything worked out. If Aizen was the one pulling the strings from behind the scenes, it was Urahara who was on the front lines, doing the dirty work, the hard work needed to keep things afloat. Most important of all, it was Urahara who was actively cultivating the gem of a talent that is Ichigo. You may have noticed almost every time Ichigo fell, it was Urahara who helped him back on his feet in one way or another. In most moments that Ichigo faced extreme danger, Urahara had an influence on Ichigo's survival. Turns out, him meeting Ichigo during his time of need were not chance encounters as it first seemed. Although you can say it was Aizen who led the encounter between Isshin and Misaki, it was Urahara who saved Misaki through the help of Isshin, allowing Ichigo to be born in the near future. This is a trend within Bleach, which has a problem started by the machinations of Aizen, followed by a solution resulting from Kisuke's efforts. In a way, these two work together to advance the plot of Bleach. It makes sense as to why Kisuke was one of the few who had his eyes on Ichigo for his whole life, as he was a part of the select few who knew of the potential before he was born. If you were to rewatch/reread Bleach, you'd pick up on many things in regards to Kisuke, viewing him in a different light. From early on in Bleach, you can see Kisuke watching, observing in the back to see the progress of Ichigo. The first time he meets Ichigo in the manga is to retrieve the Mod Soul cone, which was accidentally supplied by Kisuke. Next, we would see him knock Ichigo's soul out of his body so that he can deal with the hollow in the Don Kanonji episode. While watching, he'd say,
"Just as I thought. Wonderful. But he's got his work cut out for him. Let's see how he does."
Later, Urahara and the gang would save Orihime and Chad after they unlocked their powers and were subsequently rendered unconscious. Next, while Ichigo and Uryu were having hollow troubles, Kisuke and the crew would enter to help out, with Jinta, Ururu, and Tessai taking out the remaining hollows. As Amenos Grande would enter the battle, how kind of him to help out to ensure the safety of everyone. Surely he had the safety of everyone in mind, right? Wrong. Kisuke would stop Rukia in place with a Bakudo after she tried to help Ichigo, saying this is a battle that must be fought, and there's a method to his madness. Early on, we were shown exactly what role and objective he has. He was not the hero saving the day, but rather the masterful trainer to help Ichigo grow. but it is only after rewatching the series with that in mind that we can truly appreciate his impact. Later on, Urahara would help Ichigo leave his body to go into his Soul Reaper form to find Rukia. Again, all of this done to further help his development. When cut down by Byakuya, who was ultimately sent by Aizen, it was Urahara who saved him. Urahara would shield Ichigo from being rained down upon and bleeding to death. Urahara and Tessai helped Ichigo regain his Soul Reaper powers while introducing him to his hollow side, something they both were too familiar with. Against Byakuya, he would have stood no chance, but this was important for Ichigo to find out before he got better through Kisuke's training. Kisuke said himself he knew he would lose, and this loss would be a perfect motivation for him to train and get better. Ichigo would then go through vigorous amounts of training for 10 days under Kisuke Urahara, where he would grow considerably. Urahara would ultimately assist Ichigo in going to the Soul Society to save Rukia, who also secretly had Kisuke's Hogyuku. Kisuke knew that Ichigo stood no chance at the time against Byakuya, but by sending him over with some training, as well as his newly unlocked powers, it helped him in his cause for tempering Ichigo into an absolute weapon. In his future battles, much can be traced back to Kisuke's influence. Against Ikkaku and Renji, it was Urahara's teachings that helped him win. Here, Ikkaku would quiver in fear after hearing that Ichigo's master was a former Gotei captain, banished from the Soul Society. Against Renji, he would recall the speech that Urahara made to him to help him overcome his fear and sharpen his resolve. Kisuke would help him release a Getsuga Tensho in training, and he would do that against Renji. This would later become a signature move of Ichigo's. Against Kenpachi, it was Old Man Zangetsu and White's power which saved him, who again wouldn't have been around if it wasn't for Urahara. Against Byakuya, it was his holification powers that saved him, as well as the Bankai training patented by Urahara, which was administered by Yoruichi. The next arc was the Arrancar arc. Ichigo faced a terrifying opponent in Dreamjow, and he would have been killed if it wasn't for a certain upside down individual. Shinji saved Ichigo, and he along with the other Visors would train him on how to use his powers. Without Kisuke, the Visors would probably be dead, killed off by the Soul Society. Later on, Ichigo was killed by Ulquiorra, and it was Orihime who saved him from it. You can argue that without the Hogyuku's influence, her healing wouldn't have been possible. The next battle, he reached a new level in his hollow abilities. And again, you can relate it back to Urahara as well as Aizen. To conclude the Arrancar arc, we have the battle against Aizen. Up to this point, Aizen and Urahara planned and labored hard to ensure Ichigo's growth. But what happens when one side of the coin cannot hold its end of the bargain? When one side goes out of control? Against a bloodlusted, power-lusted Aizen, Ichigo would lose his powers. This was the most unstable form of Aizen by far, which is what made this an incredibly dangerous confrontation. But even then, when one side of this unholy partnership cannot keep their end of the bargain, it is the other side taking the right measures to ensure nothing goes wrong. That's when the other big player steps in to neutralize things. By that I am speaking of Kisuke, forever looking after his pupil and sneaking in a seal on Aizen before Ichigo could even fight him. Perhaps it was just the Hogyuku, Aizen's internal longing for others to reach his level that allowed him to get sealed. It is all speculation, but regardless, it shows you how meticulous and sharp Kisuke Urahara is. At the end of the Fullbringer arc, Urahara is seen with Isshin and Rukia to help Ichigo regain his powers. Earlier on in the arc, we hear a conversation with Kisuke and Isshin, with Kisuke asking Isshin if he is sure about this, as it is his son's future. This must have been in regards to him regaining his powers and losing the ability to live a life as a normal human being. However, one thing that came to mind was that why didn't Kisuke talk to Ichigo during the Fullbringer arc? Why didn't he assist him and warn of Ginjo? Surely they must have had a relationship to at least talk about the dangers that may creep up upon him, especially if he and everyone else is in debt to Ichigo. In hindsight, it was because he wanted Ichigo to unlock his Fullbringer powers and train to use them, and in that case, Ginjo and the Fullbringers were the best ones to help. He could have been watching in the dark as usual, to ensure the progress of the specimen that is Ichigo, and only step in when needed, which is what happened. Furthermore, Kisuke's sketchy nature is what made Ichigo paranoid, and all of that is not without merit. I'll be covering more of that later on in the video. Kisuke also may have wanted Ichigo to experience the Fullbringer's perspective, letting him learn of the world himself instead of shielding him from its horrors. Otherwise, how can you expect a hero out of him if you need to shield him from all suffering? A hero must understand all sides in order to do what is right. As one with the genealogy of a Hollow, Soul Reaper, Fullbringer, and Quincy, it is important to expose him to each race, as well as the different problems each race has, in order to become a fitting hybrid of the world, a true translator for all the races' sufferings. Otherwise, he would just end up being a pawn for the Soul Reapers, if he was only exposed to them and their problems. There were many times when Kisuke would allow Ichigo to deal with battles while he'd watch. The fastest way to defeat an opponent would have been to join forces with Ichigo and attack the opponent together. However, Kisuke's objective has always been to train Ichigo. In the Thousand-Year Blood War, just like old times, Kisuke would appear at Ichigo's window, but this time to arrange a trip for him to go to Wako Mundo to battle the Quincy's. Later on, Ichigo would engage in a battle against Kyoge, and Kisuke would sit by and watch. He accompanied Ichigo in the battle with Aizen. But why is he just watching them fight this time around? Surely he isn't afraid, especially after battling a monster like Aizen. Kisuke would remain hidden, observing the battle until he gets a call from Akon, who states they are in trouble. From there, Kisuke is seen shooting a hole in Kyoge and opening up a Gargantua for Ichigo to go into the Soul Society. Kisuke thanks Ichigo, telling him that the enemy's spirit particles became unbalanced, and he was able to land a decisive blow. All the while, he has a mysterious look on his face, with the shadows of his hat covering his eyes. Maybe he was telling the truth, as he would later explain that Kyoge switched Blute Vein to Artery, but I believe he could have disposed of Kyoge earlier than that. He just wanted to observe Ichigo battle, give him more experience for the terrifying threat he was about to face. Ichigo would also unlock his Blute Vein against Yhwach, to which Yhwach remarked that he shouldn't have sent Kyoge after him for that reason. So perhaps this is another coincidence in which Kisuke may have had a part of, although it is hard to believe such a thing as coincidence is possible with Kisuke, who may have known all of this and opted to extend the battle with Kyoge if he could. That said, Ichigo was sent to unlock his Blute abilities after breaking through Kyoge's jail, so maybe not, who knows. All that said, could it be possible that whenever Urahara is shown with the shadows covering his face, his eyes hidden, that he is in fact lying, or rather scheming with ulterior motives somehow? I think it could be possible, if not all the time, most of the times at least. For example, when Urahara explained of the ways to save Masaki, it wouldn't be out of the question that he himself wanted to go through with the scenario where a full hybrid was made. Perhaps he had a way to save her, but opted only to tell of the ways in which will lead to a full hybrid, just to open a door and see what is possible, as Kisuke often says. To continue on, when Uryu betrayed Ichigo and went on to the Soul King's palace alongside Yhwach and Jugrum, Ichigo and the gang decided to go after Uryu. It was around that time when Urahara conveniently showed up, not before when they were in potential danger, but after to book a ticket to the royal palace, as he would say. Again, he was the one making things happen, guiding Ichigo to the next challenge, and even recruiting familiar faces in Nell, as well as former enemies like Grimmjow, Yukio, and Riruka. I won't go through everything Kisuke did in the series, as I'm sure you get the point. You can undoubtedly trace Urahara's work in almost all of Ichigo's triumphs. With all that, you would think Kisuke was a main character, but in fact he wasn't. He worked in the shadows to coordinate most of Bleach, and he doesn't get enough credit for it. That brings into question that maybe he was preparing Ichigo for an even greater threat, perhaps in hell. Truth is, in relation to Ichigo's potential, Urahara wouldn't have been as successful without Aizen, and vice versa. While Aizen set the pieces in play as the orchestrator, Urahara was the conductor, playing them to the best of his ability. A good analogy to Kisuke is that of a master Pokemon trainer who had acquired a legendary Pokemon that had all types. This Pokemon has incredible potential, but it will take loads of training to bring it out. That is what Urahara effectively did throughout the Bleach series, training this rare Pokemon, exposing it to the right stimuli, the right opponents, so that he can eventually become stronger and evolve into something greater. In short, Kisuke is the storm caller, the one who summons the rain and helps others navigate it. He simulated the rain and watched from the shadows, always available with his umbrella, because he understands the growth that comes from it, as well as the dangers of too much rain. He is the one who tasked himself in Ichigo's growth as his mentor. He didn't wait for Ichigo to come to him. Rather, in Kisuke fashion, he left him with no choice. Throughout the journey, there were plenty of times he could butt in to save Ichigo's ass. Countless occasions, but no. He'd emphasize in letting Ichigo fend for himself and gain as much experience as he could on his own before interfering. Kisuke isn't the hero of this story. He isn't the prized experiment, the newly budding nuclear weapon that is ascending at astronomical rates. That role is reserved for Ichigo Kurosaki. But even then, Ichigo has the most capable man observing him from the shadows to ensure everything works out. That said, there is a dark side to Kisuke that we will explore later on in this video. But before that, let's go through the light novel series of Can't Fear Your Own World for a better idea on Kisuke Urahara's character. Despite most of the OG gang of Bleach being missing from Can't Fear Your Own World, Kisuke Urahara was featured in the light novel series. Book 1. He did not have a big part to play in the first book, but we heard his name a few times. Kisuke Urahara was said to have strengthened the seals on Aizen after the events of the Thousand-Year Blood War. Hisagi, the main character, was set to interview Urahara, and before going off to do so, he would have a conversation with Shinji in regards to this interview. All the way to Kisuke's, huh? That's tough. That guy never says anything direct in an interview, Shinji would say. This would foreshadow what Hisagi would soon face, perhaps the most challenging interview he would ever have. Kisuke's name would also be brought up in a royal clan meeting, hissed through the tongue of the venomous Tokunada Tsunayashiro. Tokunada would mention to Yoruichi that she was not aware of what the Soul King was from the start, but Kisuke Urahara should be aware, showing you how much Kisuke knows of the world, even more so than a royal clan member. That's what we learned of Kisuke in the first book. This leads to the second book, where he had a bigger part to play. Book 2. The main interaction with Kisuke was through the series protagonist, Shuhei Hisagi. As a journalist, Hisagi would interview Urahara in regards to the Quincy invasion and war at his shop in the world of the living. In the second book, we are introduced to the two through Urahara convincing Hisagi to buy a guitar. Kisuke would effectively rip Hisagi off as he'd paid 3 months' salary worth for the guitar, living up to the shady and mischievous personality we all loved to give him. This would lead to the first interview. While I won't go through all the things mentioned, I will discuss some important details. Something I enjoyed in this conversation was how it really showed off Kisuke's personality, his wit, his charm, but also his quick thinking and unpredictability. Funnily enough, all those traits he was known for in combat carried into this interview. Furthermore, the following conversation really showed how cunning and intelligent Kisuke is. His scientific knowledge is often praised, but his knowledge of people is what makes me believe that he is undoubtedly the most intelligent character in Bleach. What would seem like a regular conversation actually felt like a chess match of words between Hisagi and Urahara. Hisagi tried his best to play his cards right and gather enough information, but he was always shut down by Kisuke. Hisagi at one point started to sweat profusely, just off what would have been seen as a witty conversation. Urahara was always the type to be multiple steps ahead in combat, and this interaction showed that it was no different in regular conversations, as Urahara is always playing mental chess with everyone as his opponent. The two would start by talking about Ichigo Kurosaki, how his father was an ex-Gote captain and his mother a Quincy. They decided it wasn't the right time to let it be known that Ichigo shares Quincy heritage, despite being the world savior. The interview would then get deeper, as Hisagi would say, "Mr. Urahara, no, former chief of the Department of Research and Development, I came today to expose your past." Urahara would slightly narrow his eyes and reply, "Please don't show your scary side all of a sudden like that, Mr. Hisagi. What'll you do if Jinta bursts out crying from where he's watching from behind the sliding door? He might start wetting his bed again." This would result in an outburst from Jinta, and we see Tessai and Ururu come into the picture as well for a short period. As the interview would get more serious and Hisagi would dig deeper, Urahara's answers would get trickier, showing just how well he was at navigating conversations. When Hisagi would ask about Jinta and Ururu and how they have unique Ryuku, Urahara would say, That was a bit obvious for a leading question. Since we've been used to Mr. Tosen's interview style, don't you think that's a crude way to try to get at people's weak spots? The counter comment by Urahara stung Hisagi because he knew it was right. Again, showing you how quick and adaptable Urahara was, knowing the exact points of weakness to pick on. Initially, it seemed like Urahara did not want to share such information, and as a result, Hisagi would come up with plans in his mind on how to get him to divulge the said information. All of that was thrown out the window when Urahara would say, "So, what do you think those two are?" This surprised Hisagi because he felt that he was able to read Urahara for a bit. But Kisuke was as unpredictable as ever. Kisuke would mention how Jinta and Ururu were similar to Nemu, but still quite different from her. He would then say, "I'm sure that Mr. Kuretsuchi already knows that and is imagining my bitter expression as he dances for joy about Nemu's growth, thinking I've surpassed Urahara," and then followed up with, "Well, I guess he wouldn't actually be able to imagine that. That's because I've never genuinely been bitter in front of Mr. Kuretsuchi." Urahara would grin mischievously like a child when saying that. This can be interpreted in a few ways. In short, you can view it as how he never felt threatened in front of Mayuri. He never felt like they were even competing. Urahara was always the guy to chase, and here he was saying how he's never felt that insecurity around Mayuri. This could be that he's just not a bitter person like Mayuri, or it could be that he believes he is so far ahead of him. Perhaps it could be a bit of both. The interview would then lead to Mr. Tsunayashiro, in which Urahara would say he heard about him becoming the head of the clan from Yoruichi, and now Shunsui would know more about him. He also mentioned how he was aware of him and Tosen's past, although it happened long before he became captain. You can read about their past in my Tosen video. The conversation would then lead to Hikone, a Soul Reaper-like boy who Hisagi encountered, a boy who'd say he was Tokunaga's servant. Hisagi would mention how the boy had some mixed spiritual pressure, and Kisuke would reply, "I see. So that's how the Tsunayashiro family is willing to go. But the hollow element wasn't supposed to be a requirement, or maybe they're trying to achieve something different." This was an interesting response. He mentioned how a hollow element wasn't supposed to be a requirement. Could he have been referring to a Soul King candidate, or something else? They would then touch on how there were two other beings, similar to Hikone in Ichigo and Ginjo Kugo. Hisagi would then ask Urahara to explain, and he'd pull down a whiteboard. The whiteboard already had drawings and writing on it. It was titled, "How to Make a Demonic Soul Reaper." Urahara would then say oops and delete it. Now this could have been just to mess around with Hisagi, which I can see happening. I don't think he'd make such an error, but it also could have been that he just doesn't care and he was actually working on such a thing, on how to make a demonic Soul Reaper. Maybe it was his own cheeky way of giving Hisagi information, with him not fully picking up on it. Was this the plan with Ichigo? Or perhaps someone else? Only time will tell. If I were to guess, I would say it was Rukia. Urahara had taken a liking to her initially by planting his Hogyoku in her. We still don't know the exact reason for that. Could it have been that Rukia was initially Urahara's champion, the one to change the world with the Hogyoku and do his bidding? Or perhaps, with the Hogyoku in Rukia, she would be the one pushing Ichigo forward, giving him the strength to reach his potential. Perhaps she was Urahara's plan B if Ichigo were to falter. Knowing Urahara, it would be odd for him not to have contingency plans in place for just about everything. So it won't be out of the question to believe that Rukia was his plan B. Furthermore, upon him losing consciousness in the Thousand-Year Blood War, he would say something along the lines of, "It is up to you, Ichigo and Rukia," perhaps foreshadowing a greater power within Rukia. To add on to this, in a Q&A, a fan asked Kubo why the text behind Rukia in the manga had two different styles. Kubo would reply saying it does have a certain meaning and he may draw it later. For reference, every character of each race has their name written in a certain style. The Shinigami have a sort of Japanese brush ink style. Quincy's have this, and Hollows have this. With the Vizards, they have two styles for their names, perhaps signifying the Shinigami and Hollow powers within them. Shinji had the Shinigami style here, but once he gained Hollow powers, the depiction of the text also changed. All this led fans to believe that the style of text represents their race. Perhaps this is hinting at Rukia being a demonic Soul Reaper, as mentioned earlier, or maybe even a witch, linking the series of Bleach and Burn the Witch together. Or maybe a demonic Soul Reaper is exactly that, a witch. back to the interview with Hisagi and Urahara. They would continue on the conversation and talk about the Fullbringers. The two would mention how Soul Reapers must have known about them, or at least the visual department must have, which was run by the Tsunayashiro clan, hinting at a connection between the two, more of which I'll cover in my next video on Kinjo Kugo, so be sure to subscribe for that video. The interview will then be cut short. Urahara would sense that the two were surrounded. Yukio, the Fullbringer who aided the gang in the Thousand Year Blood War, would then enter the picture and mention how he'd want to speak with Urahara to recruit him for his company. As the two would run their usual games through conversation, a group of men and women wearing black with masks would appear and attack Hisagi. Urahara would surmise that this was the work of a Fullbringer ability, and Hisagi would notice that he was the only one getting attacked. We then see the introduction of Ora Michibane, and we'd had some funny interactions between the characters, all through Hisagi's expense of course. I'll save more of this for Hisagi's video since this one is focused on Kisuke. Hisagi would battle Ora. All the while, Kisuke would watch as he so often does. He'd step in and remove Hisagi's Gentai spirit mark, which limited his abilities in the world of the living, as he was having a tough time against Ora. Through the interactions, both Yukio and Ora, who were in the same company, would remark how terrifying of a foe Kisuke is, despite how quickly he learned of things, and how aptly he responded to the situation at hand. Kisuke would join the battle with Hisagi and they both go on to face Ora. The two would have to fend off giant reddish-black dragons, ones of Eastern descent, all summoned by Ora, who had the Kito-like ability to subjugate Reishi as a Fullbringer. Kisuke would use his Zanpakto Benihime to attack the dragons. As they'd continue to regenerate, Urahara would start a full chant of Hado number 91, Senju Koten Taiho, and unleash it, which was said to be stronger than the Grand Ray Seros that Grimmjow uses. After Hado number 91, Kisuke will bring out the big guns, the biggest one we know of in Hado number 99, Goryuten Metsu. We've seen this Hado only once before with Aizen in the Thousand Year Blood War, and so it makes sense that Kisuke would know it as well. 5 pillars of light in the form of dragons would appear from the sky. Ora would have dragons composed of lava and magma and send them after the two. Urahara would have 3 dragons protect them and send 2 after Ora. Hisagi was perplexed when all this happened, as he could only stand around and watch. He then noticed Urahara's spiritual pressure disappear, and Ora would tell Yukio they have completed their mission and captured Urahara. Bewildered, Hisagi would stand there feeling useless, and the two would disappear. However, we would later find out that was the plan all along, to stage a battle so that Kisuke could infiltrate the enemy base in Book 3. All of this was done in typical Urahara fashion, putting on a show and not telling the poor Hisagi what actually happened, effectively manipulating him. Hisagi must have interviewed many people as a journalist, but this interview must have been the craziest one yet. While it was Hisagi who was the interviewer, it seemed like it was Urahara who was the real interviewer, dictating the pace of the conversation and prying out information from Hisagi, learning more about him and playing games to frustrate him. This whole interview might have just left a bigger scar on Hisagi than the one on his face. Hisagi was put through a whole range of emotions. He entered the puppet master's domain and was played like a fiddle throughout the supposed interview, really showing off the enigma that is Kisuke Urahara. This leads to Book 3. Urahara mysteriously disappeared after the events in Karakura town. He would show himself at the end of the big battle in Book 3, which I'll talk more about in later videos. Tokunada would make his escape to his secret lair, which was equipped with weapons equivalent to nukes. He decided to let them loose, but nothing worked. At first he suspected it was Ora, but then he remembered all the security measures and alarms he set in place. Then he would be met with a rather jolly voice through the communication devices he had, saying, "Oh, hello. Why, I suppose it's the first time meeting you, Mr. Tsunayashiro. Is that you, Kisuke Urahara?" Tokunada would surmise, to which Urahara would reply, "You know, I would always crush any surveillance bugs I found flying around my shop, so I feel like we've had a long relationship, Mr. Visual Department." As the voice of Urahara would reverberate through the castle, Hisagi would catch a glimpse of it, and then he'd find out that Urahara did not actually get captured. Yukio would explain how Ora had constant surveillance on her, and so Yukio and Urahara would communicate in unconventional ways, with Urahara using the tapping of his cane to do that. Yukio had encrypted the communications in complex company code, in the case that Tokunada would be able to read Morse code. But to keep things simple, Urahara was able to recognize immediately, which alarmed Yukio. He was pretty much able to decipher and communicate in a complex coding language which he'd never seen before. And this is why Yukio and Ora often said Kisuke was terrifying. After a brief conversation with Tokunada and Urahara, Tokunada would decide to abandon ship and destroy his castle so it would come crashing down, eventually landing and destroying Karakura town if it did. Kisuke would then open up a giant garganta and with the help of Ora, transport the fallen castle to Wako Mundo. This was the end of the massive battle, but we would have some final words from Kisuke in the final chapter as Hisagi would go to finish his interview. It was only after the interview was done that we got some information on Urahara. As Hisagi would leave, Yoruichi in her cat form would ask Kisuke if he was sure about letting Hisagi leave without altering his memory. Kisuke would mention Hisagi probably thinks the Hogyoku was made to make another Soul King, but he'd mention how that was wrong. He'd say, "All I wanted to do was to create something new. The goal for doing so was secondary. I just wanted to open a new door. I used the Reo as an excuse to open the lock to that door. I simply followed my own desires. Fundamentally, I am no different from Mr. Kurotsuchi and how he sacrifices so many in order to fulfill his craving for research. Sacrifices so many was quite important here, perhaps alluding to how the Hogyoku was made. One theory was that he made his Hogyoku in a similar way to Aizen's,
Perhaps from those in the maggot's nest.
in jail from those who could no longer bear their sentence. That way it would have been more ethically favorable, but still morally grey, fitting of Kisuke. Or it could have been more so like how Aizen got it, or maybe even worse, who knows. Urahara would then say, "But Miss Hiyori did see through me. That's why, to take a neutral position, well, to be accurate, it's not neutral, but I decided to entrust some matters to a very Soul Reaper like Soul Reaper." His features softened then as he spoke about Hisagi. "When the time comes that I really do become someone who could be called a villain, it would be best to leave behind someone who can definitely determine that I've sinned, right? I'm sure that Mr. Hisagi, who saw how Mr. Tosen was and saw how he left, well, he would do that. Of course, Mr. Kurosaki or Miss Kuchiki would work as well." It was interesting how he mentioned how Hiyori did see through him, perhaps being the only character who was able to. It also makes some of her comments on Kisuke even more interesting, which I have covered in the latter analysis part of this video. After a short conversation with Yoruichi, Kisuke would say the words, "Well, let's head off. Mr. Kurosaki and his friends might really be in hot water," to which Yoruichi would reply, "Really? You're such a busy man. Don't you think you're coddling Ichigo?" Urahara would say, "A small town candy shop is supposed to coddle the kids, though I think Mr. Kurosaki is a bit too reliable to call a kid at this point." All of this really coming full circle, showing you the type of person Urahara has been throughout Ichigo's journey. Even now, he is still looking out for him. In the writer's note at the end, it was also mentioned how the writer of Can't Fear Your Own World heard about the story of how Kisuke and Yoruichi met. He, among others, remarked how Kubo needs to show everyone that story through his manga, showing us there are still things we can learn and plenty of fun moments left from these characters. Before I end off the Can't Fear Your Own World section, there is a big part that seems to be hidden, perhaps the greatest mystery of the light novels that no one talks about, a mysterious hidden arc, other than the Hell arc. Yes, I'm talking about the separate set of events happening in the world of the living during Can't Fear Your Own World. Many characters did not show up in Can't Fear Your Own World, and as a result, other characters really had the time to shine. This is why Hisagi was the main character, because Mr. Main Character Ichigo Kurosaki and his friends were busy elsewhere. Ichigo's sisters, Yuzu and Karin, visited West Japan and were met with some trouble. What did they come across and what exactly? Well, we don't know, as that is the mystery. As a result of the troubles, countless characters would rush over to help. Ichigo, Uryu, Ishin, and I'm sure Chad and Orihime would accompany them as well. Ichigo may be fighting alongside his father once again, and this may perhaps be the time to unveil his Bankai. Ryukin wasn't really confirmed, but I feel this would be a good occasion to have Ichigo, Ishin, Uryu, and Ryukin all fight together if that isn't done in the Thousand Year Blood War. Later on, Renji, Rukia, Byakuya, Toshiro, and Rangiku would join to help out. If characters of this caliber were all needed, then chances are this wasn't some last minute beach party, as there surely must have been a big problem. Let's not forget, Ichigo and the gang were missing for the entirety of Can't Fear Your Own World. and by the time the Tokonata debacle had been solved, they were still in trouble, as
Urahara would leave to accompany them.
all this brings up the question, what the hell was the threat that they were facing? Especially if Hikone and Tokonata were dealt with quicker than whatever threat they had. Could it have been more dangerous than Tokonata? Surely their squad wasn't as weak as the Fellowship gathered to take down Tokonata. What group would you say is stronger, more capable? The Tokonata Extermination Squad or the Japan Emergency Squad? You can theorize that Tokonata had planned this all along to lure and occupy Ichigo and the gang, and if that was the case, it worked, because they were nowhere to be seen in Camp for Your Own World. He effectively split up Soul Reaper top ranks. Being a part of the visual department, he must have known Yuzu and Karin were going on a trip, and from there he acted to place a threat nearby, thus occupying Ichigo and the gang for the entirety of Camp for Your Own World. But the main question we have here is exactly what could they have faced? Perhaps it could have been someone from Hell who escaped, kind of like the Hellverse movie. This could help introduce the future arc. It also could have been remnants of Yhwach or something along the lines. If I were to make a theory on what would happen, it would be this. What if the gang encountered a dragon? A dragon? You may be thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? But stay with me now. There were no dragons in the Bleach verse, but we did get introduced to them in the series Burn the Witch, which is in the same universe. In Burn the Witch, there is a western branch of the Soul Society, so you can presume the Soul Society we know is the eastern branch. Dragons are the main enemies in Burn the Witch, with some of them being domesticated and fighting alongside the main characters, with others being outlawed and hunted. It was stated in Burn the Witch, there was once dragons in Japan, where Bleach takes place in, but they were all exterminated long ago, hunted indiscriminately. Tokonata and his clans are the keepers of the past. They're the ones who documented history. If dragons were around at the time of his ancestors, he would have known, since he knew of even more taboo topics like the Soul King. Tokonata and his clans have always been collectors in the shadows, from Soul King fragments to remnants of prized souls. They always took an interest in valuable things. And so what if all the dragons were not exterminated, and some were saved by a Tsunayashiro clan, hidden all this time? If that was the case, Tokonata may have released a dragon to occupy Ichigo and the others. That could explain why they're having so much trouble. The group in the world of the living could rival the Fellowship made to take down Tokonata. It would have been hard to find threats that give Ichigo and Uryu alone a hard time, so perhaps it was not an issue of killing something, but rather protecting something. Maybe instead of killing it, they wanted to keep it safe, and so it will be challenging to calm a rampaging dragon without outright killing it. Maybe that is why they needed Urahara and Tessai, even at the end, as surely their Kido could have helped. The reason I have this theory was to help cross over the series of Bleach and Burn the Witch. This could be the catalyst for that. That brings up the question, if you wanted to connect the two series, how would you do that? Having a dragon show up could be a possible route. Yuzu and Karin may be good candidates to connect the series, as I feel they will likely be characters to travel around the world of the living. I also think if some characters were to get dragons, it could be them if they were ever to get powers. Other than the two, their big brother Ichigo was also said to have studied English in the UK. I don't see how the hero of the Eastern Soul Society branch won't come acquainted with the Western branch if he spent some time there. Ichigo was said to have liked Shakespeare, and at the end of Thousand Year Blood War he was said to be a translator. All the details add up to Ichigo visiting there eventually, and so maybe this encounter during Camp for Your Own World would lead him there. Furthermore, perhaps Orihime or Tatsuki could be the bridge to both sides, by acquiring or at least getting in contact with a dragon. This quote by Kubo gives us an idea how originally Orihime was supposed to have a dragon-like appearance with her ability. Furthermore, we have this illustration from the manga where Orihime is a princess and a dragon is protecting her until it was defeated or something. This could refer to Tatsuki, as her name represents dragon, and Orihime, whose name represents princess, symbolizing how Tatsuki will protect Orihime, but no longer needs to, as Orihime has gained enough strength to do so herself. Anyways, if none of these characters could fit in Reverse London, I'd say send my guy Ikkaku. He wouldn't fit at all, but it's always funny when he gets sent in the world of the living, so I approve. Might as well send these two as well to accompany him. Oh, and Rangiku as well, for various reasons. What do you all think about these theories? What do you think this hidden arc would be about? How would you go about connecting Burn the Witch and Bleach? Let me know in the comments.
Evil Kisuke. In previous videos I discussed how there had been rumors of how Kisuke was originally supposed to be the villain disguised as the good guy, but the idea was scrapped by Kubo. But was it really scrapped? Regardless if it was or not, Kubo left us with a lot to think about. I couldn't find anything where Kubo explicitly said this, so it could just be a fan theory, but for the sake of this video, we will entertain the thought that maybe Kisuke could be evil, as well as a future villain in Bleach. There are many moments hinting at a different side to Kisuke. Perhaps they were leftovers from Kubo's supposed original plan of him, or perhaps Kubo decided to make Kisuke mysterious and morally grey on purpose. Only time will tell. But in these videos, I will play devil's advocate and try to show off a different perspective. Let's dive deep and uncover the shadiest man in Bleach. Exhibit 1. The Hogyoku. What is the Hogyoku? Here's a description by Aizen. In other words, it is an orb that allows your dreams to come true. It senses the deepest desire of those around it and brings it to reality. You can say this orb alone manifests miracles for those around it. From what we know, there were 2 Hogyokus made, one by Kisuke and the other by Aizen, who later combined the 2 into one. Kisuke created an incredibly powerful artifact, but how did he come to make this? Truth is, we don't know, but we may have an idea. Aizen made his Hogyoku before Urahara, but it was incomplete, just like Kisuke's. In order to make it, he gouged out the souls of hundreds of Soul Reapers and hundreds of residents of Rukongai. Much was taken to create it, and all that makes you wonder, how did Urahara make his Hogyoku? Aizen is a genius in his own right, so it could be that the way he made it is the only way possible. Urahara is undoubtedly more just than Aizen, so it makes you think that maybe he found an ethical way to create it, a way where no lives are lost. It could make sense, since only by combining the 2 did the Hogyoku become complete. That could mean that both of them were different, perhaps created differently, or it could be that maybe it just needed more souls to be completed, which again brings into question, did Urahara create the Hogyoku the same way as Aizen did? Perhaps the souls he gathered were in the form of a mercy kill, through those who wanted out of the Maggot's Nest, the jail he worked in when he was a lower-ranking Shinigami. This is all speculation, no way to prove it. However, in Camp for Your Own World, we found an alarming passage which could shed more light onto this topic. Near the end of Camp for Your Own World, Shuhei assumed Kisuke created the Hogyoku to find a solution to the Soul King debacle. However, Kisuke stated that was not the case. He simply used the Soul King situation as a guise for his own scientific achievement. In that regard, he mentioned he was similar to Mayuri, and not in a good way. Kisuke says something eerie in how he's no different from Mayuri and how he sacrifices so many in order to fulfill his craving for research and scientific advancement. You could say Kisuke is sort of responsible for the atrocities committed by Mayuri, since Kisuke was the one who released him and recruited him from jail. But this statement trumps all of that. It is pretty dark considering we know the disturbing lengths Mayuri will go through as a scientist. Could it be that Kisuke went through extreme measures like Mayuri, all for scientific achievement? This brings us back to the main question. How did Kisuke create the Hogyoku? All these clues lead up to a dark, unexplored past of Kisuke. But again, there's no way to prove it, and it may not ever be explored in the series, even if the series continues. The next potential evidence we have against Kisuke is from the interaction of someone who knew Kisuke deeper than most did, suggesting a dark and treacherous side to him. By that, I mean Hiyori. Kisuke mentioned in Camp for Your Own World how Hiyori saw through him in his true intentions of the Hogyoku. Maybe it was a fluke from Hiyori, but if not, you can assume she understands Kisuke more than most characters. Back in Thousand Year Blood War, we saw a mysterious set of panels. After considering that Hiyori understands Kisuke on a different level than we do, this panel can seem a little alarming. Hiyori was a lieutenant under Kisuke when he first became a captain. They have spent time together, and although Hiyori often has a grumpy, argumentative, and confrontational personality, she does have some sense in serious matters. This could just be her personality getting the best out of her, but if I'm being honest, Hiyori would know Urahara much better than all of us, as we have only seen the good side of him. Now back to the panels. Of course, in the Thousand Year Blood War, they were at war, and Kisuke had to do whatever he could to win it. It is understandable. but maybe his objectives in this situation were different. Before I go any further, I want to ask you this. If Kisuke were to go mad with power, if he were to betray everyone and become a villain, who would be able to stop him? I can think of two characters at the least. Urahara has already defeated Aizen before, and he is deep in Mugen, so I will not be including him. Ichigo would be one of the characters. With his ever-growing potential, not even the heavens are the limit for him. Yoruichi would be the other, as she is Kisuke's best friend. Surely she has some control over him, and if anyone was able to get into Kisuke's head, it would be her. With that said, let's go back to the panel page shown earlier. Taking all of that into account, maybe Kisuke has diabolical plans, and he knows that these two would prevent him from going through with it. Sending them off earlier, which could result in them potentially dying, would hit two birds with one stone. To cap it all off, that was a very mysterious panel of Kisuke. Granted, it could just be him making a hard choice of sending his friends off to a fight, but after hearing all the information mentioned earlier, it does seem like maybe he was caught in a shady act. Perhaps he is more Machiavellian, more like Aizen than we thought. That said, I think all of this is a stretch, and this was all just Kisuke showing his willingness to succeed at all costs, even if it means sacrificing others, more of which I will discuss later on in the video. Going further, earlier on in this video I discussed the importance of Urahara, and how he was there to help Ichigo in most obstacles he faced. His influence was unquestionable, but the question that remains is, what were Kisuke's true intentions? Why was he so insistent to help Ichigo? Did he help Ichigo out of his good heart? Could be, but Kisuke is more complex of a character than that. As mentioned earlier, Kisuke used the Soul King as a guise to create the Hogyoku, when in fact, he truly did it to open a new door, to create something new, to satisfy his scientific ambitions. I believe that is also the true intention of Urahara when helping Ichigo, and he is not the only one with it. The other man who dictated the pace of Bleach, Aizen, is similar in that regard. I believe both of these characters took an interest in Ichigo because they were the only ones who knew of his incredible potential before he was even born. You can say that both of these characters' goals were to help Ichigo reach his limitless potential, see how far he can go. This panel in the Turn Back the Pendulum arc is all you need to understand that these two are on a separate level, and only they will understand each other. I'm sure both of them have plans on how to use Ichigo, and funny enough, they both have been working together to help realize Ichigo's potential. How so? Let's go back to the Hogyoku. An interesting plot point would be the placement of it. Urahara placed his prized creation, his magnum opus, inside a Soul Reaper, a subordinate of the organization who branded him as a criminal. Wouldn't you think that is an odd thing to do? And why Rukia? Why put it in a person that Aizen has a direct influence over? Rukia would have been drawn to Ichigo undoubtedly because of his spiritual powers, but more importantly, Ichigo's similarity to Rukia's mentor, Kain Shiba. Aizen was the one who sent Rukia to the world of the living, but I'm sure Aizen was able to predict Rukia's movements. This brings back the question, why did Kisuke put the Hogyoku in Rukia? Maybe he was able to predict that Aizen was going to send Rukia over as well. Maybe he knew Aizen was after the same thing that he wanted. They both must have known that she would confront Ichigo and be the catalyst for his growth, the first step into cultivating this great power. This also brings into question, could Kisuke and Aizen actually be on the same side? Maybe or maybe not. But one thing for sure is that they both indirectly worked together in creating and cultivating the man known as Ichigo Kurosaki. The sketch from chapter 1 shows that Urahara was very aware of how things are playing out. Too aware in fact. When Ichigo and Rukia were in trouble, don't you think Kisuke could have been able to step in and save the two? I'm sure he could, but if he did, Ichigo never would have gotten introduced to his Soul Reaper powers. He never would have been around the Hogyoku. The Hogyoku pretty much helps your dreams come true, and it was undoubtedly the Hogyoku in the grand scheme of things that led Ichigo to the Soul Society, through Aizen plotting to steal it from Rukia. From there, Ichigo would fight fearsome foes and fulfill some of that dangerous potential. All this shows that Urahara isn't afraid to sacrifice some lives for his own goals. Rukia could have died if things went differently, and from what we can assume, it all was done to start Ichigo on his journey. But I'm sure we will find out the real reason he planted the Hogyoku in Rukia in the future. With that said, let's continue to speculate the motivation for Kisuke Urahara's actions. Both Kisuke and Aizen understood Ichigo's potential, and you could say they both fought for control over him. To control Ichigo means you can win wars with his overwhelming power and potential. But what are the two fighting for? From what we know, Aizen is against the Soul King, and Kisuke is for the Soul King. That thought alone makes things incredibly dark. Could Kisuke have been cultivating Ichigo this whole time, just so he could get it to the point where he can replace the Soul King if needed? Could this be his true motivation, especially after losing the Hogyoku to Aizen? Could Aizen have been a better ally to Ichigo, especially since he wouldn't force Ichigo into the Soul King position? Again, this is all speculation based on the Ichigo video I made on the worst case scenario. This panel in the Fullbringer arc has a different meaning once you think of the aforementioned. In it, we see Isshin and Urahara talking about robbing Ichigo's future. This was referring to him gaining his Soul Reaper powers again, losing the ability to become a normal human. But maybe it could be regarding him becoming the next Soul King. Isshin must have known the Shiba legacy well, and so as dark as it may seem, maybe he could have known the risk of him regaining his powers, with him being a potential replacement of the Soul King. For the Shiba clan, it may have been considered to be an honor to replace the Soul King, since the old ancestor tried to do so who knows. This page states otherwise though, as it shows Kokaku talking about Ichigo going to the Soul King's palace, and mentioning Uncle will be sad, which is referring to Isshin. This most likely means Isshin would have not wanted for Ichigo to even go to the Soul King's palace, let alone become the Soul King. Again, all of this is just theories. I personally don't think they will do Ichigo like that, but regardless, it could be possible. When talking about the dark side of Kisuke, nothing is more mysterious than the conversation Urahara had at the end of Can't Fear Your Own World. Kisuke would go on to say, "When the time comes that I really do become someone who could be called a villain, it would be best to leave behind someone who can definitely determine that have sinned, right?" This quote shows that the possibility of Kisuke becoming a villain and being tried for his sins could be possible. Urahara would then go on to name a few who fit under that bill, with one of them being Hisagi, the journalist who seeks to uncover the truth. The other two were the ones who were affected the most by Urahara. Rukia, the once vessel of his Hogyoku, someone who must have her own hidden secrets we have yet to find out, with Kisuke taking a special interest in her. And finally, Ichigo Kurosaki, the man who was cultivated by the smartest, planned by Aizen and trained by Kisuke, the two who had a hand in turning Ichigo into a god, a monster, a human, and who knows what else. Earlier on, I made a video talking about how all villains believe they were doing good, when in fact they aren't. Well, Kisuke is so damn smart that he knows if things continue on, he could fall into that same category. That is a high level of understanding of oneself, as well as the effect power has on you, really showing off Kisuke's intelligence. This could be part of the reason why he tried to get rid of the Hogyoku. Maybe it was because Kisuke understood what that power does to you. Absolute power absolutely corrupts. Could that be why Kisuke got rid of his magnum opus? Kisuke knew with his considerable amount of power, he may very well be corrupted by it. All the other intelligent characters probably thought of it before as well, but it's safe to say that they pushed that thought aside. Kisuke, however, the shady man of 1,000 plans, is planning for even his possible demise through corruption. This shows you how intelligent and self-aware he really is, as the others simply enact their will and ideals onto the world, whereas Kisuke contemplates if he is doing the right thing, and whether in the future he will be doing the same. Urahara mentioned he used the Soul King debacle to open a new door, and Aizen could have also used the Soul King as an excuse to grab power. Whether Kisuke was wrong or not for what he did, he was honest enough to state it, lucid enough to understand his own faults, and know thyself, which shows that he isn't living under the illusion of his own grandeur. I think it would be funny if Kisuke truly was a saint, and this was just Kubo pulling our strings. If I am being honest, the duality of just and evil with Kisuke is what makes him an even better character. But this all brings up the question, did Urahara train Ichigo to be an absolute weapon, so that when he does fall, when he does go mad, when he eventually descends into darkness, someone will be there to take care of him? To get a better idea of who this shady man is, let's dive further and uncover the enigma that is Kisuke Urahara by analyzing his character and abilities. Starting off with his Zanpakto. Urahara's Zanpakto is named Benahime, which translates into Crimson Princess, or Red Princess. His Zanpakto pre-Shikai is often hidden in a walking cane or an umbrella rather than carrying the blade out in open, disguising it well while also adding a bit of personality to it. His Zanpakto Shikai allows for him to create and manipulate this crimson colored energy. We've seen him use different forms of this, and there are probably many more forms he can create. He can use it as a shield, as a direct attack, as a net to snare his opponents, and so on. Whatever situations he finds himself upon, he can respond by manipulating this energy to his liking, limited only by his creativity and how he'd like to deal with the situation at hand. His Bankai gives him even more possibilities. It's like the puppet master finally reveals himself, as if he is the one pulling the strings in the series, as his Bankai materializes into a large female mannequin standing behind him. His Bankai allows him to remake, restructure anything it touches within the limited area that his Bankai affects. It gives him the ability to stitch back destroyed body parts, or even complex organs like his eyes. He can restructure parts to become even stronger, as seen with him making his arms stronger to attack Askin, working as a buff to his physical abilities. His Bankai effectively allows him to play all roles: attack, defense, tank, support, healer, you name it. In the vicinity of his Bankai, he can be whatever he wants. Perhaps the most versatile set of abilities for the most versatile man in the series. The shady man of 1,000 and beyond plans meticulously calculates the best course of action throughout the series. Every small detail is thought through, just like every single cell is remade to best suit his plans in his Bankai. It's like Urahara no longer maneuvers, no longer plans through the material realms for the best course of action, but instead, he literally creates the path he wants with every single cell along with it. While his Shikai was geared towards energy manipulation, it's like his Bankai allows for matter manipulation. He is like a masterful surgeon, with no need of a scalpel. However, the changes he makes from his Bankai seem to revert after his Bankai is no longer active, and there's an area of effect for his Bankai as well. So that being said, he can only play all roles during the time his Bankai is active, as things like healing will revert after his Bankai is no longer active. Another thing to note was that Kisuke supposedly achieved Bankai in 3 days, through a creation of his, the Ten Shintai, which allowed him to do that. In combat, Kisuke is one of the most resourceful ones around. He's a master in Kido, often seen using it during his battles. He often uses Hado number 91, Senju Koten Taiho. A mastery of this art even allows for him to sneak Sealing Kido against Aizen, another master of this form of combat. He alongside Aizen were the only characters who used Hado number 99, Goryuten Metsu, really putting them in the upper echelon of Kido masters within Bleach. Furthermore, Kisuke uses his inventions during combat. He does not use as many of his inventions as, say, Mayuri, who constantly brings in Nemu, poisons, and such to battle. But he does have some things like an inflatable Gigai to fool opponents. In short, with all of his abilities and tools, Kisuke can function as a one-man army. With his wide range of abilities that even his Zanpakto grants, and his genius intellect, he can thrive on attack, defense, and even tank and support. That said, there are characters who are better suited for each role, but in terms of strategy and intelligence, there are only a few who can be spoken on the same level as Kisuke Urahara. As for the mythological implications of his Zanpakto, it is named Benahime, which again stands for Crimson or Red Princess. His Bankai is Kananbiraki Benahime Aratame, which can be translated into Modification of the Crimson Princess, Dissection at the Doors of Avalokitesvara, Open Red Princess Neo. Depending on the culture, Kanon goes by different names such as Avalokitesvara or Guanyin. Kanon is a bodhisattva, which is considered by some to be a person who is able to reach enlightenment, but delays doing so out of compassion in order to save and help suffering beings. Thinking of Kisuke's actions, this does make sense. He could have chosen a different path, similar to Aizen, but he chose not to, perhaps for this very reason, to help suffering beings, whether he liked to admit it or not. What exactly is enlightenment in this case? What could that mean? It could be that he stuck around to help others, just like a bodhisattva would. Or perhaps it is alluding to how he knew of the Soul King, and how the world operates. He knew of the true origins of the world and its secrets, and instead of acting upon it like others have, he chose to help out others and bring order. Maybe in this case, enlightened beings could have been sent to Zero Squad for the Shinigami. With the Hogyoku, he could have perhaps made his way to Zero Squad with such an invention, but you can assume that was not a part of his goals, and he chose a different path. Kisuke mentioned he did what he did to open new doors, but it could be that Kisuke was just too humble in all of this. Maybe he wanted the best for the world, he wanted to help others. Then again, this is all speculation. Canon is sometimes considered to be genderless or androgynous, which kind of fits Kisuke in his Bankai, where Kisuke is male and his Bankai figure is female. With his abilities covered, let's go through a thorough analysis of his character, starting with his design and personality. To summarize Kisuke at first glance, he is some sketchy guy who sells candy and is around children all the time. Okay, maybe that is not the best description of him. It is true, but not in a creepy way. He is a rather jovial individual and can be very goofy at times. For all the shops he could have opened, he decided for it to be a candy shop, and that tells you a bit on his personality. It was said that he opened the candy shop because he could sell seemingly strange things and avoid suspicion, but I am sure there are countless other shops that would have gotten the job done too. Kisuke is a light-hearted individual, sort of like a mischievous spirit that guides others in his own unique way. He can be quite childish himself, but don't let his playful nature fool you. As we have seen, he is a mastermind, an incredibly intelligent being. Kisuke was stated by Kubo himself to be a fast learner. Through a fan question on who would be the best driver in the Soul Society, he'd mentioned Kisuke would be the one most likely to master driving, with Asane driving the most safely, and Kambachi being the first to crash his car. That right there shows you perhaps his greatest characteristic. He is a gifted mind, and that coupled in with his insatiable curiosity makes him incredibly successful and even quite dangerous to his foes and allies even. Kisuke's danger does not lie in his sharp sword, but rather his sharp wit. As astute as they come, Kisuke's mind is his greatest gift. In a world where lifespans are far greater, one can accumulate much strength, intelligence, and wisdom. Over thousands of years, combat abilities, scientific knowledge, and so on have been honed, resulting in figures nearing mastery in their domains. However, one stands above them all in intellect, and that is Kisuke Urahara, the one considered by many to be the most intelligent. Gifted with creativity and the ability to solve problems, he was labeled as a special war power by the Wandenreich through his unpredictability, through his ability to come up with a solution for every problem through unknown means. Although Kisuke is intelligent, it is his problem-solving skills that makes him so successful. Knowledge is not enough when it comes to solving problems. You must be wise enough to use that knowledge in practical ways. And we see that with him saving the Visors, saving Masaki, aiding Ichigo and his allies, and so on. A great example of this would have been when he found a counter to the Quincy's ability to steal Bankai. Having a vast amount of knowledge of the world, like an encyclopedia, isn't as useful if you cannot find a way to use it, and that is why he is considered by many to be incredibly intelligent and wise. As for looks, he wears a black coat, the opposite of the Gote captains, who have theirs in white. Having been expelled from the Soul Society, it would make sense that he would not wear the colors of a captain, since he is no longer one. But it also could symbolize how he does not fight for the Serite, but for himself, or rather what he thinks is right. As mentioned earlier, his hat and fan give him a mysterious aura, covering his face and his eyes. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul, and so perhaps he likes for them to be hidden, so that no one can peer deep within it. Kisuke Urahara is also based off Snufkin, a character from the Moomin series of books written by Finn Tove Jansson. Snufkin is said to be a rebellious and mischievous character who, alongside his green attire and hat, resembles Urahara. Snufkin was also said to dislike authority figures and is known for being wise and mysterious at times, but also childish. Lastly, Snufkin was also someone who others often came to for help. To go on further with Kisuke's character, a common theme with him is that of manipulation. This series shows you how heroic traits can often be seen in villains, but the opposite is true as well, as seen through Urahara in this video, highlighting the grey morality of Bleach. Kisuke is very manipulative, similar to Aizen. Most think of Aizen when they think of deception and manipulation, but Kisuke has his own share of these traits, although not as much as Aizen. Both Aizen and Kisuke are Machiavellian in nature. Kisuke does seem to be more ethical in his approach, with his end goal usually aligning with the greater good. Most couldn't understand what it is Urahara and Aizen were trying to do, because most characters do not have the knowledge of the world that they have. With that in mind, telling the truth behind their actions and motives may not have been an option. Both Aizen and Kisuke thought rather highly of themselves, and while they have the accolades to warrant that, they still use tactics such as manipulation to get what they want. Maybe it was the most efficient way for them to operate, but regardless, it is sketchy and the underhanded way to operate. For example, Kisuke using Ichigo as a means to save Rukia because she had his Hogyoku. At the end of the day, Ichigo and the realms highly benefited from it, but there was more than meets the eye in the whole invasion with Kisuke's hidden objectives. Both have a persona of a harmless person, with Aizen as a captain and Kisuke as a shop owner. However, Kisuke keeps his mischievous nature in his persona, whereas Aizen seemed to be too good and kind for his own good. However, after defecting, Aizen seemed to get rid of all personas, whereas Kisuke perhaps became more mischievous through his demeanor after getting banished from the Soul Society. Speaking of the two on a bigger note, while Aizen was an agent of chaos, Kisuke can be more so considered to be an agent of order. Aizen sought to wreak havoc upon the realms, whereas Kisuke sought structure. Overall, the actions from Aizen caused much dismay, whereas Kisuke's overall actions had a stabilizing effect. While they have many similarities and differences, they had a sort of yin and yang dynamic. With Kisuke, although you can attribute much good to his actions, his sketchiness is something you cannot overlook. Seeing him as a masterful trainer is one of the ways to look at it. On the other end, it can be seen as him being manipulative and avoiding danger himself. Why fight in a battle when you can manipulate someone into fighting for you? There's no risk for you and the other person gets what they want, so it's a win-win, right? Seems like a better alternative to what Aizen would do, as he would manipulate others with his Kyokazugetsu in heinous ways and make it a win situation for him but a lose situation for everyone else. This may seem like a heartless way of looking at it, but I don't believe Kisuke truly is that crooked. He is manipulative, that is for sure, but I believe he does care about Ichigo and the gang and the rest of the characters, even if he won't benefit from them anymore. We can learn a lot about Kisuke just off his interactions with others, as well as his words. One interaction I found interesting with Kisuke was when he was training Ichigo before the Soul Society arc. In his training, he would deliver a speech that gave us more information on his perspective of fear. For Kisuke, fear during combat is a liability. While other characters have their different philosophies on life and battle, I think they all make sense in various circumstances. Unlike others such as Tosen, who spoke of the importance of fear, which I have discussed in his respective video, Kisuke talks about the negative traits of fear. Having fear itself is important in its own way, but too much fear and fear in the wrong situations can cripple you. It can render you paralyzed when operating under fear. As he'd say here, in other words, Kisuke here emphasizes thinking of what you want to happen rather than what you do not want. Thinking about the circumstances that you don't want during that act will make you hesitant, afraid, and ultimately less successful. This influences the subconscious far more than you think. Thinking and feeling what you want will prime your subconscious to act that way. Thinking of success will grant your subconscious the ability to do what it needs to succeed. Your reflexes, your body, your mind will all be heightened. But the same is true for the opposite. Visualizing failure will dull the senses and ruin your performance. Whatever you think and visualize is what you will attract. That is what Urahara was trying to get across to Ichigo. In a battle, in a fight to the death, you focus on what you want to do to prevent fear from creeping in. Kisuke's solution to this is sheer resolve. Resolve so strong that you can steer clear of unwanted thoughts and feelings. If you lack the resolve, the strong determination to succeed, then you are already at a great disadvantage. If you are constantly thinking of losing during the act, then you lack resolve. Losers think about ways to lose, and winners think about ways to win. We all have fallen prey to negative thinking and visualizing, but this was a good reminder to Ichigo and us, as Kisuke's teachings can be used in our lives in countless ways. How much resolve do you have? Has fear paralyzed or weakened you, as it did with Ichigo at the start? All of this can be boiled down into the words of think of what you want to accomplish, and be determined and disciplined enough not to fall into negative visualizations and thought patterns. Learn to control your mind, your thoughts, and feelings. If fear and negative thought patterns hold you back, it will be similar to accelerating and pressing the brakes on a car. Ensure your resolve is as strong as it can be to ensure success. When you do something, do it with all that you have. Don't let fear hold you back. Don't think of failure during the act, because that is not an option. It won't happen. That is someone with strong resolve. But it's important to gather the skills needed to back up the resolve as well, so you don't border the lines of delusion. As someone who prepares as much as Kisuke, it is important to make contingency plans as well. But during the act, there's no time for this. No time for fear and hesitation. In short, Kisuke tells us to keep your resolve strong at all times. Your mind focused on what you want. Your feelings geared towards success. Do all that, and your spirit will remain strong, with your faculties working in seemingly miraculous ways to accomplish what you set out for. One of the cool things about Bleach is that every character has their own poems, and they all help explain the ideologies of the various characters. I have discussed Tosen and Aizen's poem in their respective videos, and so we'll go through Kisuke's as well. Through this poem, Kisuke sees fate as something that could limit him, as if most use fate as an excuse to not set out for and accomplish what they want. Kisuke takes things into his own hands to make things happen, with fate and the idea of it not restricting him. This poem emphasizes that Kisuke makes things happen on his own accord, and explains how he has made such an impact in this series, with him believing that he is the maker of his own reality. Kisuke is someone with an internal locus of control, meaning he believes that the results of his life are determined by his actions, rather than a higher power like fate. His life is for him to control. He believes that only those drunk on ignorance or fear will fall prey to such thinking that the results are not influenced by their actions. When considering how much of a force Kisuke is in the series of Bleach, this perspective makes sense. Another important interaction was early on in Bleach, where Urahara would say this to Orihime and Chad after they unlock their powers. Again, this is referring to Kisuke's perspective of you deciding your own fate. Whatever that has happened to you is an opportunity, a key to open a new door, but it is up to you to decide if you will go through that door or lock it shut. Whatever happens in life, it is up to you to make the most out of it. Sorrow and sadness at the moment just serve as illusions and distractions to that. He, in a sense, is telling them, and all of us, to take ownership for our own lives. Whether it be hardships or triumphs, roadblocks or shortcuts, it is up to you to interpret them. It is up to you to make them beneficial to you. How we respond to our experiences in life is far more important than what has happened. We also got to learn more about Kisuke in his battle with Askin. When asked by Askin if he was interested in seeing what Yhwach would create after destroying the 3 realms, Urahara would reply with, "If we're talking about creating something no one has ever seen, then that has to be done with your own hands. That's what it means to be a scientist." This shows you that he isn't just a bystander, but rather the person who gets things done. He has that initiative needed to be a successful scientist, as well as the pride to change the world himself, rather than watch and wait for someone else to do it. Against Askin, he would drop some of his hardest quotes, showing off his conviction and his meticulous nature. "If I prepare 1,000 options, all I need is for one of them to work, so I make a habit for preparing anything and everything that shows any kind of promise. That's just how I work." This quote explains to us why Kisuke has been such a force to be reckoned with. Although his intelligence is incredibly high, that alone is not what makes him who he is, what makes him so successful. It is his preparation that makes him so resourceful, effective, and dangerous. Above all, Kisuke is a man of preparation, a man with thousands of outcomes right under his sleeve, and that is why he's so successful. If you make 1,000 preparations but only use one, then it was worth it. Preparing for all possibilities without exception, that's how I do things. When asked why, he would reply, "What's so outrageous? This is a real battle. This is war. If you lose, you die. Taking every possible precaution to avoid death, isn't that what everyone does?" This follow-up shows that Kisuke isn't someone who goes into battle head-on without a plan, like say Kenpachi. No, he's a thinking man's fighter. In a war, he will take every single precaution available, cultivate countless plans, and have contingencies in place for all of them. This may seem exhausting, but as Kisuke would say, When your life is on the line, it isn't so outrageous. This is war. Nothing that can help you ensure victory is outrageous at this point. Another important interaction was at the end of the Arrancar arc. In Aizen's defeat, he would ask Kisuke how he could be ruled by that thing. Kisuke will reply how all the worlds will fall apart without the Soul King, as that is how the world works. He didn't seek to flip things upside down, but rather sought to approve it from within. Even though that may not have been his objective, as mentioned earlier with his curiosity of opening new doors, his actions as a whole had a stabilizing effect on the realms, rather than the other aforementioned characters, who had an opposite effect. Urahara was a part of a select few characters who, 1. Knew of the Soul King, and 2. Had enough powers to seriously change the world. With that in mind, Urahara managed the Soul King debacle the best from all the characters this series covers. All others with this knowledge would seek to destroy the world and its foundations, to create a new one. Yhwach sought to overthrow the world, run by the Soul Reapers, to create his own. Aizen would do the same and stage a coup d'etat and seek to conquer the realms. Tokunada was a whole different mess, but he too sought the destruction of the current world for his own twisted pleasure. Urahara, however, sought ways to fulfill his own curiosity, in turn making the world better rather than seeking to change things. He could have very well been a plague to the realms, but he chose to help others rather than to terrorize them. That is an enlightened being if there ever was one, a being that is balanced and whole. Perhaps the lesson here is, rather than seeking to change the world, to save it, save yourself first. Notice your own flaws before going out to change others. Through my rain video, I mentioned everyone's relations to the rain and the symbolism behind it. For Kisuke, in particular to Ichigo, he was often the one who summoned the rain, or rather, he simulated it, similar to Aizen. They both were the ones who put Ichigo in situations that would draw out the rain, and by that I mean they will put Ichigo through hardened trials, and that would eventually bring out his negative emotions. Kisuke was the master trainer from afar, observing Ichigo in these situations so he can grow and become stronger. He was patiently watching to ensure he wouldn't drown, and when he was close to it, he'd come in to help. He would give Ichigo the right dose of the rain to ensure it wasn't fatal, but enough to keep him growing. While Aizen may have been the one to cause most of the circumstances of the rain, it was Kisuke who would ensure Ichigo made it out. The lifeguard, the sailor, watching from the dark to rescue Ichigo if needed. We saw this with Kisuke helping Ichigo after he was easily disposed of by Byakuya. Here he would stand over with an umbrella as the harsh rain splattered over Ichigo's near corpse. That itself is symbolism for what Kisuke is, the one who protects Ichigo from the rain when it becomes overwhelming, when Ichigo can no longer protect himself. One of the many guides of Ichigo, the trusty umbrella in the unforgiving rain, the storm caller, but also the umbrella in the storm. A question that was asked throughout my Camp for Your Own World series is, who is the ideal Soul Reaper? Could Urahara be the best example of that, working in the shadows for the betterment of the world? Not afraid to get his hands dirty, but also not afraid to use others for his own means? If anyone was able to secure the safety of the realms, it was him through his work with Ichigo. However, he is far more independent, and his loyalty does not lie towards Zero Squad or the Soul Reapers, as he was banished from the Soul Society. Ironically, Kisuke did more for the Soul Society than anyone else through aiding Ichigo, even though he was branded as a traitor. However, near the end of Bleach, and throughout it, you can see the relationship between Kisuke and the Soul Society getting repaired and being much better by the end of the series. To get a better idea of the character and themes surrounding Kisuke Urahara, let's discuss some archetypes associated with him. Urahara can be further characterized into archetypes like the wise old man, although he may not initially look like he is wise and an old man. As we saw in the series, he uses his personal knowledge and experience to be a mentor for Ichigo and the others. Through his character, he matches well with the magician archetype, as well as the sage archetype, both of which are associated with knowledge and wisdom. The sage focuses on the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom, in turn seeking to guide others. Hunting for the truth and seeking to understand the world is of utmost importance for the sage, and it's from there they gain the necessary attributes to become a mentor. We see this in Kisuke's character, as he is often regarded as the smartest character in the series, having profound knowledge of the world and its secrets. Furthermore, he shines being a mentor and a guide for the various Bleach characters in his own unique way. The magician is characterized by transformation. The magician is a creator, a catalyst for change who focuses more so on innovation and turning visions into reality in seemingly mystical ways. The magician thrives in turning the negative into positive, in transmuting the good into bad. All these traits can be seen with his countless inventions and solutions, with him saving the Vizards, as well as the rise in Ichigo. While the sage can be categorized with the words knowledge and understanding, guiding others, the magician can be categorized with power, with making things happen. We can see shadow aspects of these archetypes in Kisuke as well, through the detached manipulator, as well as him withholding information countless times. Both the archetypes of the sage and magician resonate with Kisuke, and you can also make the argument that they are befitting of his not-so-best buddies, Sosuke Aizen and Mayuri Kurotsuchi. There's another archetype that I think is more prevalent throughout the series, and I'll cover that in a future video. Astrological archetypes. Kisuke's birthday is on December 31st, meaning he was born under the sign of Capricorn. Just like with the bit in my Aizen video, I'd assume his birthday has no relevance to the story. But through the archetypes of the zodiac sign of Capricorn, it does fit with his character. Capricorn is a sign that is ruled by the planet Saturn, which represents time, discipline, responsibility, structure, and challenges. Capricorn is a earth sign, which are noted for their stable and practical nature. Considered to be the builders of the zodiac, they focus on bringing stability. Coupled in with the Saturnian traits of patience and long-term planning, this represents Kisuke well. In addition, Capricorn is a cardinal sign, with cardinal signs being known as the initiators of the zodiac, setting goals, making plans, and doing the necessary work to bring upon change. In short, Capricorn individuals are often characterized by their ambition, discipline, and resilience, doing whatever it takes to reach their goal. With their relentless pursuit of their goals, they are excellent leaders and planners, and tend to use strategy rather than force, all of which is fitting of Kisuke. This can be seen with the sheer amount of inventions Kisuke has created, as well as the countless influences he has had on others. The negative traits of Capricorn will be the tendency to do whatever they can to get what they want. Too much ambition to a point where their goals are all that matters. This resonates with him manipulating others to get what he wants. Capricorn is represented by the sea goat, a goat with a fish tail. This represents the ability to climb mountains and scale the seas, traverse whatever terrains they may encounter in the material and emotional realms to reach success. The motto for Capricorn is I use, utilizing the resources, the people around them to the best of their ability to reach their goals. Again, the shadow side of this archetype would be to do whatever it takes to accomplish your goals, even things considered morally wrong, like manipulating others to succeed. All in all, Kisuke fits well with the archetypes associated with Capricorn. Lessons from Urahara. Through Kisuke, we learn exactly how to succeed in any goals that you have. With Kisuke, preparation is key. A good plan, rigorously applied, trumps skill. A good strategy leads to victory despite unfavorable odds. Learn everything you need to know about your objectives, your goals. Get organized, create a plan. Think of the countless ways to your goal, and make contingency plans. It is preparation that gives you confidence, and that is where Kisuke's confidence comes from, knowing he has multiple courses of action for whatever happens, and the contingency plans on top of that. Like a magician, he always has tricks up his sleeve. Most battles are won through preparation, and it's through that preparation that Kisuke shows us to take ownership of our own lives. Your life is up to you to create. Open and traverse the doors you seek, and remember, it is how you respond to hardships and successes that mold you the most. Every situation is an opportunity for the better or the worse. It is up to you to choose. Kisuke teaches us not to operate in fear. Think of what you want rather than what you want to avoid. When time calls for action, act with the utmost resolve, with courage and confidence rather than fear. Know thyself. Self-awareness is the most important thing needed to prevent yourself from falling down a wrong path. It is through knowing yourself that you can understand who you truly are and strategize the best path for you. Don't force your ideals upon others. Work on yourself before you seek to change others, before you radically seek to change the world. Play your cards to the best of your ability. Use your resources in the best way possible. Have pride in doing the unthinkable on your own, rather than watching others do exactly that. Finally, be a problem solver. Use your knowledge and wisdom in practical ways to benefit yourself and others. Your intelligence is useless if you cannot help others. If you cannot help yourself, leave the world a better place than it was before you arrived. If you can do all of this, I am sure Kisuke would be proud. What does the future hold for Kisuke? Kisuke will be a key figure in the Hell arc, as he is perhaps the most well-rounded individual in all of Bleach. Out of all the main characters currently active, he is the one most likely to know of the secrets of Hell, so it will be interesting to see the role he plays. With Kisuke being Kisuke, I am sure he must have went as far as to plan for the events in the Hell arc, as well as the worst case scenarios if they were to eventually happen. So expect him to be a big player in the future of Bleach. Kisuke was the person who conducted Ichigo's ascent to the heavens, and now it would be Kisuke who could possibly send Ichigo to the depths of Hell. For what reason? I'm afraid we won't find out until it happens.
Control your mind, don't be influenced by fate. Solve the world's problems, solutions are for you to create. Don't be controlled by fear, show the world your resolve. Think outside the box, and constantly seek to evolve. Think of what you want, plan and prepare. Be a guide to others, an antidote to their despair. If you want to see ample change across the lands, seek to change the world with your very hands. To the undiscerned eye, he may seem harmless and kind. A wolf in sheep's clothing, he is a true mastermind. Outwitting him will always prove to be a pain. A modest shopkeeper, he is the opposite of vain. Masterful conductor of the rain, unparalleled with the use of his brain. He will play tricks on you, deceive you with his wit, manipulate your whole crew, play you like a puppet from a skit. With his intentions a mystery, hidden by shadows and fans, he is always of service, the shady man of 1,000 plans.
挽回観音開き紅姫改め